Empaths are often described as the easiest people for narcissists to destroy. That is not completely wrong. They stay when other people would have left. They explain what other people would simply condemn. They feel the sadness behind someone's cruelty before they allow themselves to name the cruelty itself. They can sit across from a person who has wounded them and still wonder what wound made that person behave that way. That is why narcissists recognize them quickly. Not always consciously, not always with a plan written out in their mind, but narcissists can feel when someone has a high tolerance for emotional confusion. They notice the person who apologizes even when they were the one hurt. They notice the person who tries to understand instead of walking away. They notice the person who pauses before judging, who keeps looking for context, who believes every harsh behavior must have a hidden story beneath it. To a healthy person, that kind of empathy is beautiful. To a narcissist, it is usable. The cruel paradox is this: empaths are not hard to trap. They are hard to keep forever. At the beginning, the narcissist does not need chains. They only need a mirror. They become exactly what the empath has been waiting for, without admitting they were waiting for it. They listen with unusual intensity. They remember details. They say things that feel almost too precise. They make the empath feel seen, not in a normal way, but in a way that feels private, destined, rare. The empath thinks, finally, someone understands me. The narcissist thinks, this works. Of course, it does not feel like that at first. It feels like connection. It feels like fate. It feels like the kind of closeness that makes all previous relationships seem shallow. The narcissist moves fast because speed prevents examination. They create intimacy before reality has time to appear. They speak to the empath's wounds before they have earned access to them. And the empath, who has spent so much of life feeling too sensitive, too deep, too hard to explain, feels relieved. They do not see the trap yet, because the trap does not look like control. It looks like recognition. That is the first reason narcissists can keep empaths longer than most people. They do not begin by attacking the empath. They begin by reflecting them. They show the empath a version of love that seems to understand their entire inner world. Then, slowly, they make that love conditional. Warmth becomes unpredictable. Affection becomes something that appears and disappears. Attention becomes a reward. Silence becomes punishment. And the empath, instead of immediately leaving, begins trying to restore the beginning. This is where the narcissist gains power. Not by being consistently cruel, but by being inconsistently kind. The empath remembers the first version. The gentle version. The one who said all the right things. The one who seemed wounded but capable of love. The one who made them feel chosen. So when the coldness begins, the empath does not think, this person was performing. They think, something happened. They think, maybe I hurt them. Maybe they are afraid. Maybe they are overwhelmed. Maybe if I love them correctly, the first version will return. That hope becomes the cage. And narcissists are very good at living inside hope. They do not need to give the empath enough love to feel safe. They only need to give enough memory of love to keep the empath reaching. This is why the empath may stay through things they once thought they would never accept. They stay through the small humiliations, the sudden distance, the confusing apologies, the conversations that twist until the empath is defending themselves against pain they did not cause. They stay because leaving does not feel simple. Leaving feels like abandoning the person they still believe is buried somewhere under the damage. That is where the narcissist makes a mistake. They mistake the empath's patience for blindness. They think because the empath forgives, the empath does not see. They think because the empath returns, the empath has forgotten. They think because the empath still cares, the empath can be kept forever. But empathy records everything. It may forgive before it understands. It may explain too much. It may turn pain into compassion for a long time. But it does not stop feeling the truth. It stores the tone that did not match the words. The apology that sounded rehearsed. The hug that felt empty. The eyes that watched pain without entering it. The moment the empath cried and somehow felt more alone than if no one had been there. A narcissist can control the story. They can control timing. They can control the face they wear. They can control how much affection to give and when to remove it. But they cannot control what the empath eventually feels beneath the performance. And that is why forever is impossible. Because forever would require the empath to keep betraying their own perception. Forever would require them to keep calling emptiness, love, anxiety, devotion, confusion, depth, and self-abandonment loyalty. For a while, they might. That is the painful part. The empath may betray their own knowing again and again. They may return after promising themselves they would not. They may defend the narcissist to people who can see more clearly from the outside. They may lie awake at night, trying to understand someone who never intended to be understood, only obeyed. But one day, the feeling inside them stops asking for permission. One day, the truth no longer arrives as a dramatic revelation. It arrives quietly, almost coldly, as a sentence the body knows before the mind can soften it. This is not love. And once an empath feels that clearly, the narcissist may still reach for them, but they are no longer reaching for the same person. The real cage is not love. Love alone does not explain why empaths stay so long. Love may begin the attachment, but it is not the force that keeps the empath circling a person who keeps hurting them. Something more complicated is happening. Something quieter. Something that looks noble from the inside and destructive from the outside. Moral confusion. The empath is not only asking, "Do I still love this person?" That question would be painful, but it would be simple. The deeper question is worse. Am I abandoning someone who needs me? That question is where narcissists build their home. They know how to make leaving feel cruel. They know how to make a boundary sound like betrayal. They know how to turn the empath's self-protection into evidence of selfishness. They know how to speak from injury when accountability is required. And because the empath is wired to feel pain wherever it appears, even in the person causing harm, they hesitate. This hesitation is what the narcissist uses. They say, "After everything I have been through, you are leaving too." They say, "I thought you were different." They say, "You know I have abandonment issues." They say, "Nobody has ever loved me right." They say, "You are the only person who understands me." Sometimes they do not even need to say it directly. A look, a silence, a collapse in their voice, a sudden display of fragility can do the work. The empath feels responsible again, not because they are foolish, because responsibility has always come easily to them, often too easily. Many empaths learned early to monitor rooms, to sense changes in tone, to become useful before conflict appeared. They learned that love meant anticipating pain. They learned that peace often depended on how well they could manage someone else's emotions. So when a narcissist enters their life, the dynamic feels intense, but not completely unfamiliar. It feels like a more romantic version of an old assignment. Keep the peace. Understand the wound. Do not be too much. Do not leave too quickly. Do not become cruel. That last one matters. Narcissists do not only exploit empathy, they exploit the empath's fear of becoming cruel. The empath can survive being tired. They can survive being disappointed. They can even survive being hurt. But the thought of becoming cold, selfish, or abandoning someone in pain can keep them trapped long after love has turned into anxiety. So the empath begins negotiating with their own pain. They tell themselves it was not that bad. They tell themselves the narcissist had a difficult past. They tell themselves everyone has flaws. They tell themselves relationships require work. They tell themselves they are not perfect either. They tell themselves maybe their expectations are too high. They tell themselves one more conversation may fix it. But notice what has happened. The empath is no longer asking whether the relationship is safe. They are asking whether they have the moral right to leave it. That is the cage. A cage made from guilt does not need visible bars. It only needs the empath to feel that their freedom will injure someone else. And once freedom is framed as harm, the empath will often choose harm against themselves instead. This is why outside advice rarely works at first. Someone may say, "Just leave." Someone may say, "Block them." Someone may say, "Stop caring." But to the empath, it is not that simple. They are not only leaving a person, they are leaving a role, the rescuer, the patient one, the one who does not give up, the one who sees the good in people, the one who stays when love becomes difficult. And narcissists know how to worship that role when it benefits them. They call the empath special. They say nobody else understands them. They confess just enough pain to keep the empath emotionally invested. They make the empath feel chosen not for who they are, but for what they can absorb. And slowly, the empath begins to confuse being needed with being loved. Need can feel powerful. Need can feel intimate. Need can feel like proof that the bond matters. But being needed by someone who consumes you is not the same as being loved by someone who sees you. The empath often realizes this slowly. At first, they only feel tired. Then they feel anxious. Then they begin to notice that their kindness is being treated as a resource, not a gift. Their patience is expected. Their forgiveness is assumed. Their pain is inconvenient. Their boundaries are interpreted as attacks. Their questions become accusations. Their hurt becomes drama. Still, they may stay. Because the narcissist keeps the moral fog thick, every attempt to leave becomes another test of the empath's goodness. Are you really going to abandon me? Are you really going to give up after everything? Are you really as loving as you claim to be? Were you lying when you said you cared? These questions are not asked to understand the empath. They are asked to return the empath to the cage. But compassion without self-protection eventually becomes self-abandonment. And even if the empath does not know how to say that yet, their body begins to know. Their sleep changes. Their chest tightens before messages arrive. Their stomach drops when they see the name on the screen. They feel relief when the narcissist is quiet, then guilt for feeling relief. They begin to understand that something called love is making them smaller. This is the beginning of clarity. It does not always come as anger. Often, anger would be easier. Anger gives movement. Anger gives fire. But for many empaths, clarity comes first as a strange sadness. A quiet recognition that they have been protecting someone else's wound by reopening their own. And once that recognition begins, the narcissist has a problem. Because the empath may still care. They may still feel pity. They may still remember the beginning. They may still understand the narcissist's pain. But a new question has entered the room, and it changes everything. What about mine? That question is small at first, almost whispered. But it is dangerous because it shifts the center of gravity. The empath is no longer looking only at the narcissist's wound. They are beginning to look at the wound created by staying. And narcissists cannot keep empaths forever once the empath stops confusing self-abandonment with love. Before an empath leaves physically, they usually leave emotionally in stages. That is why the outside world often misunderstands the process. People see the final exit and think it happened on that day. It did not. The leaving began long before the door closed. It began in tiny moments when the empath could no longer make the story feel whole. The first stage is not certainty, it is confusion. Something feels wrong, but the empath cannot name it yet. The narcissist says the right words, but the words do not land the way they used to. The apology comes, but it does not soothe. The affection returns, but the body does not relax. The conversation ends, but the empath feels further from the truth than before it began. At this stage, the empath usually turns the confusion inward. Maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe I am overthinking. Maybe I am bringing old wounds into this. Maybe I do not know how to receive love. Maybe I am the problem. This is where narcissists gain time. A self-blaming empath is not studying the pattern. They are studying themselves. They are working on their reactions, their attachment style, their tone, their triggers, their childhood, their communication. Some of that work may be real and valuable. But inside the narcissistic dynamic, self-reflection becomes distorted. Growth becomes a place to hide from the obvious. The empath keeps improving themselves for a relationship that is not improving with them. The second stage is research. The empath begins searching for language. They may not tell anyone yet. They may read quietly at night. They may watch videos they never expected to need. They may learn words like gaslighting, love bombing, trauma bond, intermittent reinforcement, narcissistic abuse. Each word hurts because it explains too much. There is relief in this stage, but also terror. Relief because the experience has a name. Terror because if it has a name, then the empath can no longer pretend it is just a rough season. They begin to see the pattern, not only the incidents. They begin to understand why the highs felt addictive and the lows felt unbearable. They begin to realize the relationship was not confusing by accident. Confusion was part of the control, but knowledge alone does not break the bond. This is where many empaths suffer privately. They know what is happening, but they still feel pulled. They understand the cycle, but their nervous system still waits for the reward. They can explain the abuse, then miss the abuser an hour later. This contradiction can make them feel ashamed, as if knowledge should have made them free immediately. It does not. The mind may learn the truth before the body feels safe enough to live by it. The third stage is the hollow moment. This is the moment narcissists cannot fully predict, because it does not depend on evidence. It does not always happen during a betrayal. It may happen during an ordinary conversation. It may happen while the narcissist is being kind. It may happen while they are saying the same words that once would have brought the empath back. I love you. I miss you. I am sorry. I will change. And suddenly, the empath feels nothing behind it. Not peace, not hate, not even full detachment, just a terrible absence. The performance is still moving, but the life has gone out of it. The face is there. The voice is there. The familiar phrases are there. But something inside the empath recognizes that the person they kept trying to reach may never have been there in the way they believed. This is not a dramatic moment from the outside. No one else may notice it. The narcissist may think the conversation is working. They may think the right words are landing. They may think the empath is softening. But inside the empath, something has stopped. The performance has stopped producing belief. This is the crack that cannot be repaired by more performance, because before this, the empath could be pulled by hope. Maybe this time is different. Maybe the beginning was real. Maybe this apology means something. Maybe the mask is finally becoming a person. After the hollow moment, the empath may still struggle. They may still cry. They may still miss the fantasy. But they can no longer fully believe in the mask. And that changes the entire relationship. The fourth stage is the quiet decision. It is usually not theatrical. The empath may not announce it. They may not even have a plan yet. But somewhere inside, a sentence forms. I cannot keep abandoning myself to keep believing in you. That sentence is the beginning of the real exit. Not because the empath suddenly stops loving. Not because they become cold. Not because the narcissist no longer matters. But because the empath has finally begun to include themselves in the moral equation. They stop asking only what the narcissist needs, what the narcissist feels, what the narcissist fears, what the narcissist might become. They begin asking what staying has been doing to them. That question is the turning point. What has this done to my peace? What has this done to my body? What has this done to my ability to trust myself? What have I called love because I was afraid to call it harm? Who have I become while trying to keep this relationship alive? These questions do not create instant freedom, but they create a direction. And the direction is no longer toward the narcissist. It is toward the self, the empath, abandoned to survive the relationship. That is why narcissists can pull an empath back before the process completes. They can use guilt. They can use pity. They can use memory. They can use the old voice, the old tenderness, the old wound. They can reopen unfinished grief. But once the process completes, there is almost nothing left to pull, because the empath is no longer leaving from anger, and anger can fade. They are not leaving from exhaustion, and exhaustion can be relieved by a temporary kindness. They are not leaving from logic alone, and logic can be overwhelmed by longing. They are leaving from recognition. They have recognized the cage. They have recognized the performance. They have recognized the wound beneath their own loyalty. They have recognized that the person they were trying to save was costing them the person they were becoming. And once an empath recognizes themselves again, the narcissist is no longer dealing with the same supply. They are dealing with someone who has finally begun to come home. The most dangerous moment for a narcissist is not when the empath gets angry. Anger can be used. Anger can be provoked, redirected, blamed, softened, or turned into another conversation about the empath's tone. The narcissist knows what to do with anger. They know what to do with tears. They know what to do with pleading. They know what to do with the empath's need for closure. The most dangerous moment is when empathy turns inward. For a long time, the empath's deepest gift has been pointed away from themselves. They use it to understand the narcissist's pain, to explain the narcissist's distance, to soften the narcissist's cruelty, to imagine the wounded child behind the adult who keeps hurting them, to forgive behavior that has not been truly repaired. Their empathy becomes a bridge. The narcissist crosses over again and again. But one day, the empath stops asking, "What happened to them?" and asks, "What has this been doing to me?" That question changes the entire structure of the bond. It sounds simple, but it is not. For an empath, turning compassion toward themselves can feel unnatural at first, almost forbidden. They are used to feeling everyone else. They are used to making room for other people's pain. They are used to being the understanding one, the patient one, the one who can see the hidden wound beneath the visible behavior. But now they begin to see their own wound, not as an inconvenience, not as an overreaction, not as something to explain away, not as something smaller than the narcissist's past. They see it clearly. They see the nights they could not sleep because one message changed the temperature of their entire body. They see the times they apologized just to end the punishment. They see how often they were careful with words around someone who was careless with their heart. They see how much joy they edited out of themselves to avoid being mocked, dismissed, or envied. They see how their world became organized around another person's moods. And then they see the deepest thing. They see that they had been more loyal to the narcissist's potential than to their own reality. That realization is painful because it removes the romance from the suffering. It shows the empath that what they called devotion was often self-erasure, wearing a beautiful name. It shows them that patience can become a hiding place for fear. It shows them that forgiveness, when demanded repeatedly without change, becomes permission. This is not the moment the empath becomes hard. It is the moment they become honest. The narcissist may sense the shift before it is spoken. Something changes in the empath's voice. They no longer explain as much. They no longer chase every silence. They no longer rush to repair tension they did not create. They no longer offer paragraphs to someone committed to misunderstanding a sentence. They become quieter, but not weaker. This quietness is often mistaken for defeat. It is not. It is the sound of energy returning to its owner. The empath is no longer pouring themselves into a person who only reflects back need. They are sitting with their own pain, maybe for the first time, without immediately converting it into compassion for someone else. They are allowing themselves to feel the cost of staying. This is where something structural changes. A narcissist can survive an empath who is hurt, as long as the empath still believes the narcissist's pain matters more. A narcissist can survive an empath who is angry, as long as the anger keeps them engaged. A narcissist can survive an empath who leaves physically, as long as part of them is still waiting for an apology, a confession, a return of the beginning. But a narcissist cannot easily survive an empath who has become a witness to their own pain, because that empath no longer needs the narcissist to confirm what happened. They have stopped outsourcing reality. They have stopped waiting for the person who harmed them to become the authority on whether harm occurred. This is why closure changes form. Before this moment, the empath may crave the confession. They may imagine the narcissist finally saying, "I know what I did. I know I hurt you. I am sorry." They may believe that sentence would free them. But after empathy turns inward, the empath begins to understand something colder and cleaner. A confession from someone committed to distortion is not closure. It is another doorway. If the narcissist admits a little, the empath may wait for more. If the narcissist apologizes vaguely, the empath may try to make it real. If the narcissist cries, the empath may comfort them. If the narcissist says they understand, the empath may enter the old hope again. So the empath stops waiting, not because truth stops mattering, but because their truth no longer requires the narcissist's permission. This is a different kind of freedom. It does not always feel victorious. Sometimes it feels like grief. Sometimes it feels like sitting in a room with all the excuses gone. Sometimes it feels like realizing that the person you protected in your mind was also the person you needed protection from. That kind of clarity is not loud, but it is difficult to reverse. The narcissist may try to pull the empath back with the old wounds. They may become fragile. They may become charming. They may become furious. They may become the victim. They may become the person from the beginning for just long enough to test whether the door still opens. But the empath now hears a different question beneath every attempt. Are you still willing to abandon yourself for me? And once the empath can hear that question clearly, the answer begins to change. No. Maybe not spoken yet, maybe not posted, maybe not explained to mutual friends, maybe not even delivered with perfect confidence. But inside, where the narcissist used to live as a source of confusion, the answer begins to form. No, I will not call this love just because you need me to. No, I will not keep shrinking my pain so yours can remain the center. No, I will not prove my goodness by staying available for harm. This is why narcissists cannot keep empaths forever. Their control depends on the empath caring for everyone except themselves. Once the empath's compassion includes their own suffering, the entire system begins to collapse. And what collapses first is the fantasy. The empath does not only have to leave the narcissist, they have to leave the person the narcissist pretended to be. This is the grief few people understand. From the outside, it may look like the empath is missing someone who mistreated them. People may wonder why they are sad, why they are still thinking about it, why they cannot simply be grateful it is over. But the empath is not only grieving the relationship, they are grieving the beginning, the voice that felt safe, the attention that felt like destiny, the tenderness that arrived before the cruelty. The version of the narcissist who seemed to understand every hidden room inside them. They are grieving someone who is still alive, but was never real. That is a strange grief. There is no funeral for a mask. There is no public ritual for realizing the person you loved was partly a construction built from your own longing. There is no easy way to explain that you miss someone and no longer believe in them at the same time. But this grief is necessary. Because as long as the empath is still waiting for the beginning to return, the narcissist has a rope. Hope is the rope, not love, not even attachment alone. Hope. The hope that the first version was the true version. The hope that the cruelty was the wound and the tenderness was the person. The hope that if enough patience, enough understanding, enough perfect love is offered, the mask will become real. When the fantasy dies, that rope breaks. The empath may still feel sadness. They may still remember. They may still have moments when the body reaches for what the mind no longer trusts. But something has changed. They are no longer negotiating with the ghost. They have buried the version they were waiting for. And once that happens, the narcissist's old weapons begin to fail. Guilt is usually the first weapon. Before, guilt could bring the empath back quickly. One message could do it. You left when I needed you. You promised you would never give up on me. I guess you are like everyone else. The empath would feel the old panic, the old need to prove they were not cruel, the old urge to explain that they still cared. But after the fantasy dies, guilt sounds different. It no longer sounds like a cry for love. It sounds like a demand for access. The empath begins to understand that compassion without self-protection is not kindness. It is self-abandonment. They can care about someone's pain without volunteering to be the place that pain is discharged. They can understand why someone became harmful without offering themselves as proof of forgiveness. Then love bombing fails. This may be the hardest one, because love bombing returns wearing the face of the beginning. Suddenly the narcissist is soft again, present again, reflective again. They say the things the empath waited months or years to hear. They bring back the voice, the tenderness, the urgency, the illusion of being chosen. But now the empath can feel the machinery beneath it. They do not think, finally, they changed. They think, this is what happens when control is slipping. The words may still be beautiful, but beauty is not the same as truth. The apology may be emotional, but emotion is not the same as accountability. The promise may be intense, but intensity is not the same as change. Once the empath sees the performance as performance, it cannot become innocence again. Then silence fails. Before, silence was punishment. It made the empath anxious. It made them replay conversations, search for mistakes, prepare apologies, and reach out first just to restore connection. Silence trained the empath to abandon themselves quickly. But after the empath has turned inward, silence begins to reveal itself. It is not power. It is absence. For the first time, the quiet does not feel like abandonment. It feels like oxygen. The space that once triggered panic begins to feel like proof that the body can exist without constantly monitoring another person's mood. The silence that once felt like punishment starts feeling like freedom. And finally, the smear campaign fails. When narcissists can no longer control the empath privately, they may try to control the story publicly. They may imply the empath was unstable, too sensitive, ungrateful, dramatic, cold, or abusive. They may tell fragments of the truth arranged in the shape of a lie. They may present themselves as the wounded one and the empath as the person who changed. The old empath would have rushed to correct every distortion, not from ego, but from the need to be understood. They would have wanted everyone to know what really happened. They would have wanted the truth to rescue them. But the empath who is truly leaving understands the trap. The smear campaign is not only about reputation. It is an invitation back into the relationship through conflict. It says, come defend yourself, come explain, come prove, come make me central again. And the empath refuses. Not because the truth does not matter, but because not every lie deserves access to your nervous system. Not every false story requires you to re-enter the battlefield. Sometimes the final boundary is allowing people to misunderstand a version of you that no longer needs their permission to be free. That is when the narcissist finally loses, not when the empath blocks them, not when the empath stops crying, not when the empath looks strong enough for other people to believe they have healed. The narcissist loses when there is nothing left inside the empath that can be used as a hook. No unfinished confession, no fantasy waiting to be revived. No guilt strong enough to override self-respect. No hatred intense enough to keep the bond alive. No need to win the story. No belief that love requires self-erasure. This is why empaths are the ones narcissists cannot keep forever. Because the manipulation depends on the empath staying separated from themselves. It depends on their sensitivity being turned against them. It depends on their compassion flowing outward while their own pain remains unnamed. It depends on them calling the cage devotion, but an empath who has finally witnessed their own pain cannot unknow it. They may still remember the narcissist. They may still grieve what they hoped was real. They may still carry lessons that ache when touched. But they no longer belong to the person who taught them to disappear. They do not leave because they stopped feeling. They leave because they finally felt everything, including what it cost them to stay.